Hello, Merit Academy. Mr. Wright here. We, as some of you may be aware, we recently had a student a former student, I should say, who fell prey to suicide. And in light of that, as well as the difficulties and challenges that we face, especially here in Utah, we decided it made sense for us to engage in a little bit more interactive and Utah-focused suicide prevention this year. And so after discussing it with staff and administrators, other teachers and such, I put this together for us. And we recently just had this training this week. If you're watching this video, you missed it or you're wanting to review it. So thank you for coming. Appreciate it. This is an important topic, something that a lot of us, including myself, have a connection to and have experience with. And so it's important that we address this because these are our students' lives and sometimes staff's lives. These are lives at stake, right? And so it's important that we address this issue. So our goals for our event and for this training included, obviously, we want to prevent suicide at our school. That's the #1 goal, right? We want to make sure that suicide does not strike here at Merit Academy or anywhere with our friends, family, and stakeholders in the school. We also want to make sure that we're all educated through this training on what we can do if we notice warning signs, risks, how we can intervene if someone is contemplating suicide, and in a worst case scenario, how do we respond if a suicide has been carried out? How can we prepare ourselves and our students to be aware and know what they can do to be prepared for such an action, right? Or anyone considering such an action. And then we had a group discussion and we talked a little bit about some ideas that we had, and it was great. And we're going to be taking some of those ideas, those initial ideas, into consideration with those who want to volunteer and become part of our suicide risk team. So specifically, let's talk a little bit about Utah. You may not be aware of this, but Utah has higher than normal suicide rates. And so that's why it's really important that we address this. Our suicide rate over the last 10 years of data that we have has increased 400%. That's a problem. That's a concern. And like I said, it's always been higher. We'll talk a little bit about the reasons for that. People for a long time didn't know why that was, why specifically areas in the Intermountain West, the Rockies, seem to have bigger struggles with suicide. But we have a higher than average suicide rate. And this has led to the term of this area being known as the suicide belt, right? Utah being among one of those states with the top numbers of suicide in the nation. Part of this has to do with elevation. So recent studies have shown across the world, we've known about this, but we're not sure exactly why. But when you get above 2,000 to 3,000 feet in elevation, things seem to click or change in our brains. Antidepressants don't work as well. Those connections aren't functioning as well. And also depression and suicide rates increase as well. We don't exactly understand why, but scientists are finally starting to piece the pieces together and figure out that there is this connection between elevation. And so it's something that we need to be aware of, especially at a school in Utah with a higher elevation, just under 6,000 feet. That is concerned that in elevation, we should be aware of that. And so, how can this info, we had a discussion on how can this info help us as teachers. We discussed that. We also watched this video right here, which you're welcome to look at. And it talks a little bit more about this interaction between elevation and suicide, and definitely worth watching. So feel free to go ahead and check that out. We also discussed risk factors and warning signs and how we can be aware of those as staff and teachers here at Merit, and what can we do? How can we be ready? How can we be prepared? How can we recognize when this is happening? Suicide's complicated. There are a lot of risk factors and things that can play into suicide, and it's important that we understand them though. One of these triggers may not set off the whole thing by itself, but all of these can be factors. And if we notice one or two or more of these, then we should probably be concerned. For instance, a history of depression, history of illness, family and mental illness, that can be something that we need to be aware of. If people have engaged in risky or alcohol or other abuses, that's one of the factors. There's a lack of support at home or at school. Students don't feel like they're supported. That can be a factor into that. If they're having relationship issues, right? A stressful life event, maybe they just broke up with a boyfriend or girlfriend, right? Those can all be factors. And unfortunately, easy access to lethal weapons. If people are feeling depressed, not feeling good, and they're like, hey, I know where I can find a gun, or I know where I can find some easy to access pills that I can OD on and just swallow a whole bunch of them, kill myself. Those are factors that we need to be aware of. So what are some of the warning signs for youth? Youth specifically, it can be hard. And we've got this video here that I'd like to share with you guys. Let's go ahead and watch this.
I have my ups and downs, just like anybody else.
Maybe more than anybody else.
I can be hard to figure out.
And I like my privacy.
I don't want you looking over my shoulder all the time.
But you know your kid better than anybody else. And if you think he's acting different than usual...
Acting really down, crying all the time for no good reason.
Or getting really mad.
Not able to sleep, or sleeping too much.
Shutting her friends out or giving her stuff away.
Acting reckless, drinking, using drugs, staying out late.
Suddenly not doing stuff he used to love.
Or doing stuff that's just not like him.
It might be nothing to worry about. It might just be high school.
Or it might be something more. He might be depressed.
Not just feeling down, really depressed.
It might be that your kid is thinking about killing himself.
It happens. More than you think. More than it should.
And people say, I had no idea.
I thought it was just a phase he was going through.
I never thought she'd do it.
I wish he'd come to me.
I wish he'd said something.
I wish I'd said something.
When it's too late. So if you think your kid's acting different, if she seems like a different person, say something.
Say, what's wrong? How can I help?
And ask straight out. Are you thinking about killing yourself?
It doesn't hurt to ask. In fact, it helps.
When people are thinking about killing themselves, they want somebody to ask.
They want somebody to care.
Maybe you're afraid you'll make it worse if you ask. Like, you'll put the idea in their head.
Believe me, it doesn't work that way.
It doesn't hurt to ask.
In fact, the best way to keep a teenager from killing herself is to ask, are you thinking about killing yourself?
And what if they say yes?
Or maybe.
Or sometimes.
Well, here's what you don't say.
That's crazy.
Don't be such a drama
You're
queen.
making too much of this.
That boy's not worth killing
Yourself over. It's not going to solve anything.
You're just trying to get attention.
You're not going to kill yourself.
What you do say is,
I'm sorry you're feeling so bad.
How can I help?
We'll get through this together.
Let's keep you safe.
A lot of people think about killing themselves. Adults and kids.
most of them never try it, but some of them do. So if your kid says,
I'd be better off dead.
I can't live with this.
I'm gonna kill myself,
Take her seriously. Find someone she can talk to about it. Someone who knows how to help.
Sometimes kids want to kill themselves because something happened. A breakup, a failure.
But sometimes it goes deeper, and it's not going to go away by itself.
Get some help. Talk to your doctor.
Or a counselor at school.
Or your minister.
but don't just let it drop.
And make sure that your kid always has someone to turn to. Someone he trusts.
Make a list together, right then. 3, 4, 5 names.
Put a suicide hotline number on there too.
Have him keep that list in his wallet, so he always knows where to turn.
Make sure your home is safe.
If you have pills she could use to hurt herself, lock them up.
If you have a gun, don't just lock it up. Get it out of the house. The bullets, too.
And one more thing. If you think your kid might be about to hurt himself, don't leave him alone.
Take him to the emergency room.
Call 911 if you have to.
We all have our ups and downs, but sometimes it's more than that.
If you think something's wrong, the only way to find out is to ask.
Ask straight out. Are you thinking about killing yourself?
Don't wait until you're sure. Trust your gut.
Because it never hurts to ask.
And it can make a big difference.
All the difference.
In your kid's life.
So we won't be showing all the videos today that we did in our training, but that's one that I feel like is really potent and powerful, and it brings up some really good points. And so hopefully we can be aware of those things and see those things. And remember that even if someone's not suicidal, that those feelings of depression, especially if they go on and on, those can eventually lead to suicide. We want to make sure that none of us here, Merritt, are feeling that way. So how do we act? How do we respond, right? And so what we did is we looked at these different situations, and we responded to them specifically. Some of the things you might notice are if you see someone searching about suicide, right? That could be a big indicator, right? Like, why are they looking at that? And asking them, right? Talking to them. Just keep the lines of communication open. That's really important. If they're looking for illegal drugs, that could be an indicator. If they isolate themselves from their friends and family, if they're sleeping a lot more than usual, right? Or they're a lot less. If their behavior has changed significantly. If they're saying, like, out of the blue to people, hey, like, good to see you around, or bye, like that's an indication. If they're giving away prized possessions, things they really care about, this is an indication that they've made a decision that they're going to commit suicide, and that we need to step in, right, before it does happen. Things we say matter, right? And like the video said, talking about it, that's okay. In the past, people believed that if you talked about suicide, that could give people the ideation, and they might commit suicide. But actually, just communicating, recent research has shown, just talk, right? People want to be heard. They want to know that other people care about them. And when they hear that, that makes them feel better about themselves and their lives. And they're less likely to think that, hey, my life is worthless and I'm worthless. There's no reason to stick around. And so if you hear people commenting on that, or they act and say that they're not feeling good, or they're not feeling like they're worth anything, those are things worth looking into, right? And that they're warning signs. And one by itself doesn't mean this kid's going to go kill himself, but it does mean that we might want to keep a closer eye on them and be aware, and perhaps talk to mom or dad about it, make sure that they're aware as well. Anyway, all of these different things, these all can play into this, and it's important that we talk about it. It's okay to talk about it. Realize that it is okay to talk about it, right? But as these different things add up, this can lead to people feeling like nothing I can do, right? Feelings are a huge part of this. I mean, suicide is generally when people feel hopeless. They feel like there's no reason to live anymore, right? And so if you see depression, you see anxiety, you see bursts of anger, right? Kids flipping out for not really good reasons, loss of interest in life, they're just kind of dead to the world, right? If people feel extreme humiliation or shame, these can all be triggers that can lead to this, right? Suddenly maybe they improve, right? That might be they've made a decision. They're like, okay, I'm going to act on this, and I feel good about it. I think this is a good decision. Be aware of that, right? Anyway, so we had that discussion. We discussed it. We looked into these things. We talked about examples of these, and I'm sure that you can think of some as well. But be aware of those. Consider when you've seen this in your class, or when you do see it in your class, how will you respond? Right? Because talking about it, it's okay. It's okay to talk about it. And honestly, I know when I was a kid, when I had some problems with issues with depression, and when people asked me about it, it felt better knowing that someone cared. So talk to them, ask them, let people know, hey, are you okay? I'm worried about you. Anything I can do to help? And it makes a big difference to know that someone cares. We're also we talked about practices that we could do to make sure that we can try to nip this in the bud and prevent suicide. One, we want to make sure that we identify these kids like we mentioned before. And then we need to be able to quickly refer these kids to mental health professionals who can help them and make sure, oh, yes, this kid does have a problem with depression. Or maybe we're just overreacting, but better to overreact than not, right? So we as teachers, what can we do? Right? Well, why does it matter what we do? Well, we spend a good portion of our time with these kids, right? We see them at their best, and we sometimes see them at their worst. And if we're not interacting with them and talking with them, and they don't feel cared about and appreciated in school, they may not get any of that at home, right? And so we have a big play in their lives. It's important. In fact, Utah state law says that we should be able to recognize developing signs and symptoms with this. Because if we don't, how are we supposed to know? How are we supposed to get these kids the help they need? We can't, right? So we need to be able to recognize this. And we're all in this together, right? Whether you're the principal, whether you're the janitor, whether you're just a TA, whatever it is, even students, right? We all need to be aware of these things and be ready to respond if needed. School counselors are a big part of that, right? But they're not the only piece, okay? And we can send people to go talk to our counselors, Mr. Jenkins, Ms. Lashuk. They're awesome. We love them. But realize they're only part of the puzzle. We're part of the puzzle too, as regular teachers, right? Social workers, psychologists, they can help too, right? For instance, Lone Peak, about roughly 5 years ago, they had a really big high-profile suicide. It made a big deal. And the district sent a full-time psychologist to help them, right? They have only lost one student since then, right? And before that, they had lost several. And after that highest profile one, they were like, we need to make this a focus. And thank goodness they did, right? But, Paul Dymick, their psychologist, he's not doing that by himself, right? He's doing that with all these other people helping out. The National Association of School Psychologists, they recommend that we have one school psychologist per every 700 people. Unfortunately, in Utah, our numbers double that. We can do better, right? That's something that we can look at here in Utah, something we can look at Merit Academy, and something that we might want to consider. They also created what are known as peer programs. We have a peer program, Hope Squad, here at Merit Academy. It's fabulous. Those who work with Hope Squad, Mr. Jenkins, Ms. Latursky, we love you. You guys are awesome. Keep up the good work. It makes a difference. It really does. We have a really strong Hope Squad, and we're grateful for that. And those peer programs can be really helpful. If you want to check out that link there, you can see some more examples of that, especially regarding Hope Squad. And we discussed that as a group. Lone Peak as well. What else have they done? They've created a community coalition to make sure that people in the community are aware of suicide as a real issue. And this isn't just kids, needing to tough up. These are real issues and real concerns that people and students and everyone should be aware of. So we had a discussion regarding that. Looking at other experts, Kim Myers, she's the coordinator for Utah suicide prevention here in the state. And she said, wouldn't it be great if we didn't have to experience a crisis to learn from it? And that's what we're trying to do here with this training. Okay. Kathy Davis, she said, investing in school-based mental health services can improve test scores and graduation rates and decrease discipline problems. Right? And so not only are we going to be helping kids make sure that suicide doesn't end up happening, obviously it's a huge problem, but this having, ready to access mental health services and professionals make a huge difference in any school. And that's something that we hope that we're aware of, and perhaps the school board here at Merit can consider and see if there's anything we can do to improve on that, right? And think about that too as teachers. If you think there's anything we could do, or if you know somebody who could be helpful in that way. Just having more counselors and more social workers can make a big difference, right? So that's important to consider. And then we had a discussion about that and some of the difficulties we face as a charter school with funds, but ultimately it's important that we're aware of that and consider it. And unfortunately, sometimes this tragedy is going to strike, right? So how do we respond to that? That's important, okay? Often, right, we think, oh, it was so sad. I heard this story about so-and-so killing themselves in another school or a couple of towns away, right? That does happen, right? But we often think it's going to happen somewhere else, right? And then it hits home, just like it did with our former student. And so it's important that we recognize that not only when it happens once, but it can also spread. This is known as contagion. When let's say a kid kills himself and his friends are like, oh my gosh, Timmy, why? And maybe his really close friend decides, you know what, it's not worth living. I'm going to be with Timmy too. And so that is a real threat and something to be aware of. Something that happened at Harriman High just a few years ago. They didn't have any suicides. For 7 years they were open. And then in 2017, they lost 7 students. 7, right? Terrible. Not easy. How do you deal with that, right? Half of the counselors at that high school left because they couldn't handle it, right? It was too hard. It was too difficult. They felt like maybe they'd somehow failed these kids. It's obviously really hard on the students too. Since then, Jordan School District, where Harriman's at, they ramped up their spending. They worked on increasing school counselors and social workers. Tooele County School District also had a similar situation going with them, and they beefed up that as well. And they used funds from a federal grant, which is something that we may want to look into here at Merritt, since money is always a concern. Salem Hill, just down the road, right? They also had another tragedy in 2014. And so what they did is they created a school-wide initiative called Positive in the Present. And this didn't cost any extra money, took a little bit of training, but they just worked with each other and said, okay, we're just gonna talk. And so every day they have a conversation, right? And at the very beginning of the day, and they just say, hey, what are some positive things going on in our lives? Like 5 minutes every day, that's it. But a lot of the students said this made a difference for me, right? And so that's one thing that we discussed in our meeting as well. And we'd love for you, watchers of this video, to consider it as well. And think about it, and we'll be discussing it later. What do we do after, right? What happens after a suicide has occurred, post-vention? We want to make sure that when this stuff does happen, we're ready for it. So our goals when this sort of thing happens is we want to assist survivors in the grieving process. They lose a friend. That's hard. They need someone to support them during that time so that we don't have contagion. We want to make sure that another one doesn't occur, right? Like happened at Lone Peak and these other places. Harriman, where they lost 7 kids, right? All in the same year. We want to be able to refer those kids and get them the help they need. We want to make sure that we understand what's going on with them and make sure that contagion isn't an issue. And of course, whatever we can do to make sure that the school community and culture is healthy and people feel safe and secure there, we want to keep that going, right? So why does it matter? Well, after a suicide occurs, it can be really challenging, right? People feel anxious. They don't feel safe. We want to make sure that they do. We want to make sure that is the case. We want to make sure that those who are coping with the suicide, they feel supported. They aren't triggered into considering something that they otherwise might not do, right? Because they lost a really close friend or whatnot. We want to make sure the survivors and other exposed people who are close by and related or have connections to the victims, that they have the support they need. And we want to make sure that's in place before a suicide happens so that right away we can engage it. Otherwise, we may not be fully prepared and we may have a full-blown contagion response of suicides on our hands. Like happened at Harriman, we don't want that. So we've created a suicide crisis team, right? And so, we pointed out those people. If you want to be on the suicide crisis team as well, you're interested, we'd love to have you. For those who are part of the suicide crisis team, you guys are going to be helping and aware of what needs to be done, and you're going to be able to step in the breach and help with our staff and our students when this sort of thing happens. Okay, so when you're part of this team, right? Those people will be, if you have a relation, like you knew the student really well or whatever, they're going to let you know in person what has happened. It's not just going to be a phone call, not just going to be an email. There's going to be a conversation, right, to just help support you in that. If you need to leave the classroom because you're not sure how to react to it, they'll be there to take over, just in case you need it, right? You need to go to the funeral. We've got you covered. Don't worry about that. That is the last thing you should be worried about is class and all that stuff. And we'll also help make sure that you're aware of different community mental health services, right? Not only should we be aware for ourselves, but for our fellow staff. And as part of the crisis team, right, we're going to be working towards helping address reactions. There's going to be a lot of powerful emotional responses that happen after a suicide. We're there to help you, right? we're going to inform you as much as we can legally and safely. I'll let you know about what happened so that you don't feel like you're in the dark and keeping secrets. So we want to be as transparent as we can. And we're also going to, again, discuss and remind you about all of these things that are going to be important as you engage with your class. Looking for warning signs with other students, things that you can do to help kids talk about this and talk and healthily respond to their feelings. It's important. It's really important. And so what else can we do? What else can we do to make sure this doesn't happen again? Once something happens, make sure that people are aware of the facts. Don't let rumors run rampant, right? Let them know. Obviously, we have to respect privacy, but as much as we can share that. Let people talk. Let them share their feelings. Let them know that it's okay to feel bad. It's okay to feel crappy. It's okay to be upset and mad and angry and all of these things. These are normal. Let them go through the grieving process, right? And let them know that's okay. Let them know, too, that guess what? Suicide's terrible. It leaves behind all of these issues for all these other people. Look at all of us, how we're dealing with this suicide, right? And so how can we healthily respond to that? And also, it isn't a bad idea to adjust academic expectations during this period because people are struggling. And so, give people a break. Give students a break. Let them maybe take longer on an assignment. Maybe just get rid of an assignment if it's unnecessary, right? Allow kids and recognize that it's okay to feel grief and be upset during this period. Recognize who else might be at risk. Make referrals, right, as needed. Make sure that students feel supported and that students are supporting each other. And just make sure that they know that we care and that they have access to help whenever they need. And then so we discuss this as a group, and I want you to consider these questions too. How do you feel about this? Is there anything more that we could add to this list? Is there anything we need to be specifically aware of and maybe be a little bit careful of? We had that discussion. We would like you to participate in that discussion too. It's important that we as staff recognize who are survivors, right? Survivors, people who are still left over, right? And how are they being affected by this? Is anyone going to possibly imitate this, right? Because they're a close friend. Maybe they said, hey, we're going to have a suicide pact, right? Because they're really good friends. Maybe they treated the suicide victim really badly the last time they saw them, and they feel guilt because of that. Are they somehow close to the suicide? They were good friends with this person. Do they have a history of any of these things? All things that are important to consider, right? But we, as a staff, we just have to make sure that we're ready to respond, right? Because these kids are counting on us, right? So be willing to talk with them about it. Be willing to mention it. Don't hide it. Don't shy away from it, even though you may want to. They need to know that we're the adults. They're the kids, and they need help. They're going to need help after a suicide happens. We need to be ready to respond to that. Obviously, we need to be aware if we're seeing other kids who are reacting in ways that may make them at risk, right? And again, lives are at risk here. Lives are in the balance. We need to be ready and able to respond, right? And sometimes we won't be able to, and that's where the crisis team can step in. So if you're feeling overwhelmed and you're like, I can't deal with this, that's okay. But we as adults and as a school need to be ready to step up and help because the kids are going to be struggling even more than we are, right? And sometimes we send those kids to talk with a counselor or the crisis team. And like I said, you want to talk with the crisis team, we would love to have you. Reach out to us, right? I'm on the crisis team. We've got several others, Ms. Latursky, Mr. Jenkins. There are others. We'd love for you to participate with us. We had a role play and where we discussed one of these issues happening. Think about that for yourself and consider either a recent something that happened where you believe there might be a suicidal potential suicide in the making, or something that has you concerned, and just consider that. It's also important that we provide psychological first aid, right? Just like regular first aid. After suicide happens, we need to be ready with it, okay? And so what can we do? Like we said before, listen. Just listen, be able to respond to people. Protect those students. Work to protect them. Know that those feelings and those anger and all of that, that's normal. And let them know it's normal and say it's okay. It's okay to feel that way. Connect those kids, talk with them. Make sure they know that they have a connection with you, that you care about them and their feelings. They need to know that. They need to know that you're willing and able to help them, and you're not just asking for lip service, that you actually care. Let them know that it is possible to return to normal life, but also that those other feelings are okay, right? That's okay too. Let people know that ultimately it's not their fault, right? And if you are feeling that way, here's support for you, right? And be willing to answer and discuss those tough questions, because the kids aren't going to know often how to respond to it, although sometimes they surprise us. We need to be ready to step up as the adults and model that for them, and be the ones who are ready to respond and show them this stinks, but we can get past this, we can recover from this. If students want to have memorials, that is okay. Allow students, we should encourage kids to go to, the funerals and memorial services, right? We should treat them all the same though. It shouldn't matter who it is. It shouldn't matter if it's a student that is only at the school for 5 months, or a student that's the quarterback, right? It shouldn't matter, okay? Feel free to, as long as the parents and the family has given permission to mention that yes, this was a suicide, we're okay with you talking about it, great. If they don't want that, respect their privacy. That's important, right? We should encourage these suicide prevention efforts. And we need to have a policy for any spontaneous memorials that may pop up at the school. We don't want the kids to think that we're being calloused and disrespectful of them and their friends and their feelings. But we should also make sure that those memorials are safe and in an appropriate place. And so having a policy for that would probably be a good idea, to make sure that's somewhere in our policies, and that we have something ready to go if and when that occurs. Again, thank you for attending this. Thank you for participating. We're sorry you couldn't come to our live one, but we're grateful that you're participating now. Remember that you got to be careful when this stuff happens. Who you say, what you say, but be okay, and realize that it's okay to talk about at the same time. Suicide's preventable, but it's complicated. There's a lot of reasons it happens, and don't blame yourself. There are treatments that we can use that can help kids who are feeling suicidal or depressed. We all play a role. You and me, we all do. We all play a role. We need to be aware of that and be ready to step up when it happens. But we can recover. We can beat this, I promise. Anyway, thank you for participating. All of these are some really great different things that we use, things that we can use and be aware of. The Safe Utah app, the Suicide Prevention Hotline. All of these are going to be useful to you. And so take a look at those, check them out if you're wanting to learn more. We hope that you will. And these are the sources that we cited today. And then we ended with a question and answer session. And again, just want to thank all of you for participating in our training, and realize that we're here for you, and we're all here for each other. We're all in this together, and we appreciate all of you. We know that this is something that's going to be a real challenge if and when it ever happens. And we're dealing with kids with suicidal and depressed thoughts all the time, but we can do this, I promise. Thank you for being part of Merit. Thank you for all the great work you do. And we'll see you guys on the flip side.